Hello, this is Truth Be Told Transformation, and I'm Bonnie Burkert, here to share tools for transformation to live your highest truth. One thing that's true, none of us are getting out of this alive. So let us demystify death a little bit. Let us see the beauty in death. With that, I've invited a special guest today to speak to us. Welcome, Salicrow.
Hi there. Thank you for having me.
Hi. Tell us where you are, Salicrow.
I live in northern Vermont in an area called the Northeast Kingdom. I'm about 40 minutes from Canada, and I actually live on top of a small mountain. So I still have probably 2 feet of snow.
Incredible, as we tape here in a high spring in Los Angeles, in Burbank.
Yeah, totally different.
Well, that's great. Actually, in your bio, I definitely read about Vermont, but I loved calling it the Northeast Kingdom.
Yeah.
I thought you were just doing a rebrand.
No, it's actually the area that I live in is called the Northeast Kingdom. And it was named that in the 1940s, I believe, by a politician, and it kind of stuck. And it is considered probably the most rural area of Vermont. And we're known for our natural beauty, outdoor tourism. So we have a lot of mountain biking and pristine lakes and that kind of stuff.
So tell me how living in this natural setting informs your background, your education, and your spirit in the work that you do.
It's a huge part of the work that I do and my own personal magic. In fact, my second book that came out last May was called The Path of Elemental Witchcraft. And it was all about working with nature in a really simple folk magic kind of way, in which we recognize that nature is sentient and that we are in connection with that. And that if we're going to make these transformations that we need to in this time of climate crisis, that we have to begin to really delve into that. And for myself, it's been my whole life. My parents were avid hikers and campers, and my first teacher was my grandmother, who was she was psychic. She didn't call it that, and she just called it knowing and talking to the dead and things like that. People from around came to see her, so she taught me starting at a very young age. Like, my first memories of being taught are around 3 or 4 years old.
Can you share that memory with us, and as we talk more about specifically about your work as a medium and the contacting those who've left us?
Sure. So my first experience with spirit was actually when I was about 3 months old, but I don't have memory of that. But I have memories of the story because my father's mother had died, and my grandmother, my great grandmother who raised my dad, was at the funeral as well and could see my grandmother playing with me. She knew that I was going to be psychic. So she started teaching me and my sister from the time we were really young. And my first memories are of her telling me things like, spirits talk to you, it's okay, Sally. And I had a lot of experiences, particularly with mirrors when I was a child. I could see like the outline of spirits and stuff when I was a kid, or like kind of like that shadowy bit, if you will. But I did a lot of my first interactions with spirit through the use of regular household mirrors.
Ah, right, exactly. So, wow, so you've got this long lineage. So I'm going to go ahead and jump into the title of your book, and just so that we can
Sure.
talk more about that, because I think it weaves in with both your history and then what you through the years, what you've learned from us. So, Spirit Speaker: A Medium's Guide to Death and Dying. I saw a review talking about, again, and as I introed the show, really demystifying, finding the spirituality around that. And that's what we call the show today, is the spirituality of death and spirit communication. So what's happening to us as we we're in our final time, about to leave?
Well, That's a big question. I do cover that in the book. So, Spirit Speaker came about because I wanted to answer the questions that I get asked most often by my clients. So, when people come for spirit communication, most of my clients are everyday people. They're, old ladies and waitresses and police officers and lawyers and mothers and lovers, and they're just everyday folk. I could go into any like pub and say these are my people, or so it's not like I'm working with everybody. I'm working with is highly spiritual. What I'm working with is people who are searching for a connection with their beloved dead. They're mourning, they're missing somebody, and I try very hard to demystify what is happening for people so that it's approachable for people regardless of whether they have a strong spiritual practice or not. We all crave and want to have that connection with our dead, and we want to understand what happens to our dead. So when we are actually dying, in that time of, betwixt and between, as I like to call it, when it's neither here nor there. And in the spirit world, they refer to that time, at least to myself, that's what I've received as information, was as the gray. So when somebody is actively dying, they are in a energetic space called the gray, in which they are closer connected to the spirit world while still being connected to the physical world, because they're still usually in their body. And when somebody's in the gray, it usually means they have a year or less to live. And sometimes people will go past that point, but usually if they go past it, it's really unpleasant. So the gray is, in the spirit world, is a time when the person starts to show more. So I often compare it to pregnancy, as birth and death are two ends of the same story, right?
Interesting, yes.
So, there's really is this connection between the two. And when somebody's pregnant, we see their belly growing. We know that a baby's coming. When somebody is dying, they start to show up more in the world of spirit, which means their spirits who are waiting for them become more aware that they are on their way in. So that's what's actually happening. And because of that, there is usually amplified spirit activity at this time, not only for the person who is, in the gray, but also for caregivers of the person who's in the gray, their family, people who work in hospice or death doulas often experience heightened experiences with spirit, meaning they're more likely to have a visitation. And that is because that person who is passing, in many ways, their energy is creating the energy that is needed for contact, because they're in that betwixt and between. A medium is in that betwixt and between too, because for spirit communication to happen, there has to be an energy source. And the energy source can be a piece of land, such as like vortexes, ley lines. That plays a part, making spirit communication in certain areas easier. But the other way that they have energy is working through mediums whose energy is easier for them to tap. And a lot of mediums, myself included, will find that they can't wear batteries, anything battery operated. You'll drain it because the energy is being moved through you and is actually tapping the battery that's on you as well.
Wow.
I discovered that when I was 8 years old. I didn't know it had to do with being a medium until I was much older, but I was about 8 when I started realizing that anything battery operated, I couldn't have it. I would drain it. Like literally, I drain a watch battery buy a new battery within a day easily. And my phone has to be like plugged in a lot, and my computers are always, their batteries die, and they just, even if they're a laptop, have to be plugged in. So I just accept it. But when somebody's in the gray, they're also that battery. That's why it's easier for people to have an experience, because there is an energy source for the spirits to use.
That's really, really cool. And a quick side story: we had our Parapod festival included ghost hunting, and a tour of a haunted mansion, and we definitely had a number of people saying that their phones had drained, inexplicably.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to give a little anecdote to that as well.
Yeah, that's a fun thing. I mean, it is once you figured it out. Once I figured it out, actually, the first gift my husband ever gave me when we were dating was a wind-up watch because, tell me he had been listening to me and that he realized this weird thing about me. So that was kind of cool. I still have the watch.
That's beautiful. So we've mentioned your book, and we'll come back around to the themes of dying. But I'd like to ask some about your influences because, again, as I learned about you, Salicrow, I was learning things. It's definitely the intuitive medium, psychic medium, intuitive healer. I saw Druid.
Mm-hmm.
So let's touch on that one.
Yeah, I did a 3-year course with the Green Mountain Druid Order. It's with my teacher, whose name was Ivan Macbeth. He has passed on, and the Druid Order's, now run by his wife, Fern. But I trained with Ivan, and Ivan was a British Druid, part of OBOD, which is a very large Druid order in the UK with people throughout the world. And so this 3-year course in Druidry, I went away one weekend a month for 9 months of the year for 3 years, studying Druidry. And in the end, I graduated with a trip to the UK in which I married the earth inside Stonehenge and visited multiple stone circles and holy wells. And so I consider myself both a witch and a druid. People ask me, and I am a white witch, but I really consider myself a green witch because I am also a druid. I see nature as sentient, and my spiritual practices are based in nature. And I believe that we are co-creators of our reality, and that we are needing, particularly in this time, to be working closer with nature and with those forces, those elemental forces, because that's what's really needed in this time of climate crisis. And yeah, Druidry is a Celtic form of spirituality in which the earth and its seasons, its changing seasons, are seen as sacred. So there are often ceremonies at the solstices and equinoxes and the cross quarter dates between those, in which the ceremonies are based really on the turning of the seasons and of the earth itself. And I've actually lived my life in connection to the turning of the seasons since I was about 23 years old, and making note of how the seasons and my own way of being were connected, that maybe, that it wasn't a good time to start a new project in the fall when things were going to sleep, that was more of a project for the springtime. Those are simple magics that are both deeply connected to the earth, but to ourselves as well.
Very resonant for me. So I'm right there with you. I just remember...
Yeah. Druidry is very similar to a lot of Native American practices.
Which is one of the other things I wanted to ask you about. So you mentioned, before we slide to that, let me just stay in the sweet spot though, because wouldn't you say that a lot of witchcraft pagan practices are similar, the wheel of the year, correct?
Yes,
okay.
Absolutely.
Do you care to give us a distinction between Druidry? Sorry, I can't say it.
Druidry, or they also call it's Druidry and Druidism. So Druidism is probably easier to pronounce. And I think that's an interesting thing too, because I think Druidism and Buddhism are both spiritual practices. They're not necessarily, do they consider themselves religions? They consider themselves spiritual practices. And Druidism, for example, you could be a Christian Druid or you could be a pagan Druid. In fact, places like Glastonbury, England, have, you know, are really big Mecca centers for both Celtic Christians and Druids. So there's, or through that magical pagan people. So there's definitely a mix there.
Brilliant.
Um, I think the difference between witchcraft and Druidism is witchcraft involves more active co-creation. So witchcraft is very much, a lot of things are done in order to make something happen or to enhance the likelihood of something happening. So you can think of spells as activated prayer, and witchcraft is definitely more connected to being an active co-creator and saying that you are going to use the energies of the earth or the energies of yourself or of a deity that you're working with, to help manifest changes that you'd like to see in your life.
Okay, and then Druidism, less so.
Druidism in some ways it's a spiritual practice that keeps us in that flow and connection to the earth as sacred. It definitely has rituals and ceremonies, but it is, there's not as much energy put into things like developing prophetic abilities or communicating with the ancestors or, doing energetic healing. Those things all fall more into, in many ways, the realm of witchcraft.
Yeah, excellent. Very helpful. Thank you. So also part of your background that I learned is your Blackfoot, Native American Indian heritage. So please
Yes.
tell us how, again, of the earth, as we first mentioned, where you're from. Tell us about how those practices have informed your...
So first of all, I really like to stress with that this is my ancestry and that I was not raised on a reservation. My great grandmother raised my father. So I just call her Grammy Brown because she was my Grammy, his mother, even though it was really his grandmother. And she was half Blackfoot. Her mother was a full Blackfoot woman. And so my teachings that came through Blackfoot ancestry were really the teachings of my grandmother and what she was taught by her mother. And I really like to make that distinction because I never experienced, teachings in a community or a circle, of people. That wasn't part of it. It was family traditions. And my grandmother wove both her Blackfoot and her Irish Traveler traditions because her father was an Irish Traveler, which is a minority group of Irish that are, Irish gypsies is a good way of looking at them. They were traveling people. And both had very similar, in many ways, belief systems that were very close to the earth and that you asked permission. That was probably the biggest thing, is that my teachings were always about asking permission. So when I do any kind of work, whether it be magical manifestation, working with the earth, or working with somebody's beloved dead, it's an invitation. I am asking that force to work with me, or I am inviting that spirit to come into share space so that I can help them to communicate with their living loved ones. So reciprocity was a huge piece of the teachings that I was taught. We ask permission, we give invitation, we respect boundaries, we give offerings.
Yeah.
These were things that were definitely from my grandmother's Blackfoot heritage, was the giving of offerings, the asking of permission, the acknowledgement of spirit in all things.
Was this the same grandmother that taught you some of the tips about spirits and listening to spirit?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
So my parents were hippies. um, my dad was a Vietnam vet. My mom was actually a teenager. And my great grandmother did an awful lot of my raising. She was not, I mean, my parents, I lived at home with my parents and was fed and loved and clothed, but my grandmother was my biggest teacher. And I spent a lot of time with her, both myself and my sister did. And she taught me a lot of psychic development things. Sometimes it was simply that if I was seeing something, she could see it too. And so she would say, "What are you looking at?" And now you have to understand that my sister also is psychic. One of my sisters and I both are psychics and are really close in age. And so it was also that if I saw something, she could see something.
Amazing.
If she saw something, I could. So we had a lot of affirmation. But my grandmother taught me a lot of psychic development things through games, through card games and, simple practices that made it didn't seem like I was doing anything special. In fact, she regularly said to me, "Spirits talk to you, Sally. It's okay." And she said it in the same way that she would say, "You have brown hair and blue eyes."
Isn't that amazing? Yeah, that's great, that kind of encouragement. I mean, imagine if that was something that we all learned at a young age. Maybe we'd have more peace.
I actually wrote, my first book was actually a memoir, and it's called Jump Girl, The Initiation and Art of a Spirit Speaker. And that was my story of growing up psychic, of the different experiences I had. And I find that when people come to see me and they bring that book to see me, that they have it underlined. They have, they've got highlighters, they've got pieces of paper sticking out in it. And the reason why is they're marking the experiences that they had that they could then recognize in my book. And because I wrote the memoir in a way where I told about my experience and then explained what was actually happening to me from my perspective of being a professional psychic I've been a professional psychic for over 30 years. So it helped a lot of people to realize that these experiences that they were having all through their life, that they didn't know what they were, or they thought that, they were crazy or imagining things. All of a sudden, there's somebody telling them about their story and explaining that this was actually real. So I think that a lot of people would find that they too have a lot more psychic experiences than they believe that they have had.
I think there's more and more acceptance. I mean, I'm of a different generation than you, and I think that there's, you talked about your parents growing up as hippies, and so my parents were younger than that, and maybe, I don't know, I don't think they would have been hippies.
Right.
But I feel this is becoming, here we are, talking about this to share with the world.
Yeah.
So in your years of doing this, do you find that you mentioned sort of normal people coming to you. Is there greater acceptance all the more?
I think there is, but to be quite honest, first of all, Vermont is a very liberal state, very much like California. There's a lot of, we're probably the two states that all the hippies moved to, okay? So we have a lot of liberal thinking in these areas. And I was actually on a school board for 9 years when I was in my 20s, while I owned a witchcraft shop in the local town and, was the local psychic. So I have done this. I started my business locally, and one of the things I did that really kind of expanded my recognition was I started doing home parties, and I would do them in an hour and a half driving radius of my house. And so I would have these parties and I'd go to people's houses, I'd do readings for them, and then the hostess would get a free reading, and then the next person at the party would decide they wanted to do it with their friends. So I just started expanding all these people I came in contact with, and these were regular everyday people. When I first started coming in contact with people who were more associated with a bigger spiritual community of, who were authors and stuff like that. And I told them that who my people were, they were surprised. I'm like, the witches and the pagans are not really my only people. I was like, my people are everybody. They are, and it always has been. It's always been that way. I have gone to, police officers' homes to do spirit communication for a group of police officers who had lost a friend in action. I have been in doctors' homes, and I have been in waitresses' homes, and I have been, I think because I talk about things in a straightforward way and I never leave people hanging. So if I talk about magic, I tell people it's science that hasn't yet been explained.
Mm-hmm.
Supernatural is still natural. It's just a bigger amount of it. So like if you get a supersized order of fries, it's still fries. You just got a bigger portion. And so supernatural abilities and experiences are just more.
Yes.
We are experiencing more.
Yeah. Yeah. This is it's great. And I really love hearing that. And that's part of the goal of my show also, is to demystify some of these mystical topics and just say, because I think there's so much interest in it. And I mean,
me too.
I mean, we've all lost somebody. I mean, that's what this is about.
I also feel like, if people ask me what I want to do, I tell them I want to change the world. And that I don't think I'm the only person to do it. But if that's what you ask me what I want to do, yeah, you too, right? We're both people who are saying we want to change the world. So you can't do that by singing only to the choir. So I've made it my purpose to try to make the things that I experience normal so that I can reach people, like you were saying, who are interested, but nobody wants to be talked down to. And a lot of time metaphysical things they assume that the people know what they're talking about. Yeah. And so if you don't have a background in that, you don't understand the lingo.
I agree.
So by using simpler terms, it makes it approachable to everybody.
I see it in yoga as well, how it,
yes.
Yoga got a little bit to get into that down dog. It's like, whoa, let's slow down. I mean, do people even know how to do that properly before you whip them through a whole series? So
exactly.
I think that's really, really good. So, Salicrow, one of the topics in your book, if you'd like to, I think this is an important one, very uncomfortable one to talk about, but if people would like to explore, it's suicide. So, I mean, I've thought to myself, how is suicide against the law? I mean, it's very interesting, right?
Right.
I see how it's against the divine law, mm-hmm. but the law of our nation, interesting. So, I mean, do you want to touchy, but I'm going to ask.
So I've been a spirit medium for the public for over 20 years now. And one of the things that I tell people is that suicide, first of all, we have to change how we talk about it. And this is something that I was corrected on once and have made it a point of trying to share that, is that, it's often said that somebody has committed suicide, and really it should be death by suicide, because committed is what makes it sound like a crime. And yes. I believe that it's a crime in our country because of religion. It used to be that a person who died such couldn't be buried in hallowed ground, and they were considered outside of God's grace. And first of all, I'd like to say that I have never met anybody who's been to heaven or hell. That as a spirit medium who communicates with people's beloved dead, having done this over 20 years publicly, I have never met anybody who is in either of those places. I personally believe in reincarnation. I do believe that there is likely a higher realm of existence, but that we don't get there on one shot. It's not like one life and that's it, because let's face it, we're not all given even relatively close to the same kind of survival situations. So with suicide, I feel that the person is already in hell before they make that decision. And this is not me recommending it, because I do think that spiritually there is, hardship that comes from it, not just to that spirit, but what comes after in families becomes really, really painful. So, one of the things I try to explain to people is that when we die, our emotions are turned down. So, if we imagined our emotions on a volume dial of 0 to 10, like kind of like ourselves, most everyday people are going through their life with their emotions set at maybe a 3 or a 4. And a person who's really struggling with anxiety, depression, mental illness is likely to have their emotions set at like an 8 or a 9, which means they are literally drowning in their emotions. Because if we had to live every moment of our life with the volume on our stereo set at its like full capacity, we would start losing our mind.
Right.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so when people are in that place, they're not always rational. They are not making well-founded decisions because they're in so much pain. And when they die, their emotions are immediately turned down. That's for all of us. Our emotions get turned down to about a 2 when we cross into spirit. So somebody who has taken their own life, whether it be by suicide or overdose or cirrhosis of the liver from drinking most of your life, they are going to go into a place that I refer to as time out. And I look at it like being similar to when a child has been naughty or has been acting up and you have them sit in a timeout chair. They are there to reflect on their actions, to see how their actions affected others, and to be able to calm down and feel how other people feel about them, what's really going on. That's the same thing that's happening to a person who's been responsible for their own passing or who has died with a lot of unfinished business. And it is a place of healing. One of the things, though, that comes with it, and maybe this is why, there's a law against it, and this is something that I experience as a medium, is that the after effect of suicide is a wave of that emotion being thrown out. I have worked with parents and spouses of people, children who grew up without even really knowing their parent because their parent took their own life at a young age. And the pain that these people carry becomes, the pain that was inside of that person who died by suicide is now transferred over in many ways to the people who cared about them. And that's why suicide is sometimes talked about as being being contagious, not in a germ form kind of contagious, but in the sense that if there's suicide in a family, there's a higher likelihood to be suicide in another generation in the family. If there's a suicide in a school, there's more likelihood that there will be a second suicide than that first one. So it's contagious in the sense that the pain that is created by having somebody we love take their own life that's that contagious piece. Somebody else is likely to feel that now.
Yes. Powerful reminder. And I really would like to acknowledge, Salicrow, your approach to all of this and your look at death and spirit communication is as that from a healer. You are.
Yes.
You're a healer. You're an intuitive healer. This is the work that you've done. And it's really to help the people that are still here have some peace and understanding, right?
Yeah, I tell people all the time that you would not see me leading a haunted house tour. I am a healer. I have my Reiki Master in 6 schools of Reiki. I've been a sound healer for 20 years. Everything I do is based around healing. So whether it's psychic divination, looking into somebody's life, their past, their present, their future, past lives, whether I'm talking to their dead or whether I'm actually working with them in healing sessions, that's my approach, is that, we need to heal. And we also need to realize that this separation from our beloved dead, from our dead, is only a recent phenomenon. We started in like the 1950s when television came out. We homogenized death. We took it from all of the different ethnic cultures' beliefs on what happens at the end of life, and we mashed it into this Leave It to Beaver version in which we get, a wake, a funeral, and 2 weeks of casseroles, and then we're supposed to be over this. And in that process, we let go of things like family altars, telling family stories, bathing and anointing on our own dead, taking active part in their crossing. All of those things started becoming, strange to us. Things that had, for all of humanity, been normal and woven into our cultures.
That is amazing. And you've just listed a couple of the points that we can read in your book. Again, Spirit Speaker, A Medium's Guide to Death and Dying. And I'm wishing you the best of luck with this book, Salicrow, as well as your others. Your other book is called Elemental Witchcraft, right? So
actually, it's called The Path of Elemental Witchcraft, because there's two books, and one of them is just Elemental Witchcraft.
Okay, that's great. We will find you for sure. There's so much to learn. There's so much to talk about. We could keep going, but I'm just going to, send you off with gratitude and reflection. I mean, you've really given me a lot to think about in this conversation, and it's all something that we're dealing with, all ages. Everybody needs to, and I really like what you said about pulling from different traditions and having a celebration of life, and not necessarily just trying to wrap it up within, like you say, a couple of weeks. And just knowing that grieving takes a while, and there's different ways we can do it without it being sad and lonely. It can be a beautiful reflection.
Thank you for having me, Bonnie.
We'll see you soon. I'm heading to Vermont. I want to be a Druid too.
Oh, there you go. There you go. Vermont's
and we need
place.
to talk about Rune Valder. Is that how, do I say it right?
Yes.
Okay, so again, one of the many areas that Salicrow studies, big interest in the runes as well. So I love the pulling that you do from the northern traditions of Europe.
Yes,
so,
I have a
so much to talk
relationship
about
with Odin.
Okay, well, next conversation for sure. Thank you again, Salicrow.
Right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
We appreciate you listening, everybody, and we hope that you'll be sure to share and tell everybody about Truth Be Told Transformation and the other Truth Be Told shows. Tony Sweet is on live every Friday at 3 p.m. Pacific, so definitely watch and ask him some hard questions. Robert Hensley is on Mondays at 3, also live with the Minuteman Report. And in Espanol, we have Metaphor on Tuesdays, 3 p.m. I'm Bonnie. We will see you very soon. And thanks again for listening, everybody. I'm here to really just shine the light. Namaste.